in the chat, baby. Come on. Fever
A beauty. Caitlin Clark. Masterclass. A 45-point double.
Caitlin Clark put on a spectacular show.
What happened inside Gainbridge Fieldhouse on Friday night settled an argument that had been building in Indiana basketball for weeks. For months, the conversation around Caitlin Clark had split into two competing narratives. One side pointed to a back injury that had cost her games and minutes restrictions, along with a rough shooting stretch that had her making just 3 of 19 three-point attempts over her previous 3 outings, as evidence that opposing defenses had finally caught up to her. The other side kept insisting the numbers didn't support that story, that the slump was temporary, and that the moment she found her rhythm again, the league would remember exactly what it was dealing with. Against the Seattle Storm, that second argument won, decisively. The context matters here because this game did not happen in a vacuum. Just days earlier, 11 Republican members of Congress, led by Representative August Pfluger, had sent a letter to WNBA Commissioner Cathy Engelbert. The letter referred to Clark as the face of the league and pressed the commissioner to explain how the WNBA handles physical play directed at her. A question prompted by an incident weeks prior in which Phoenix Mercury forward Alyssa Thomas struck Clark in the throat during a game, a play that drew no foul call in the moment but later resulted in a fine and a 1-game suspension for Thomas. That letter drew a response from Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Writing on his Substack, the NBA Hall of Famer pushed back on the framing, saying that calling any single player the face of the league, absent the kind of career-long, cross-platform dominance associated with someone like Michael Jordan or LeBron James, was a disservice to a generation of players who built the WNBA before Clark arrived. He was careful to separate that argument from a judgment on her talent, calling her a very good, possibly great, player, and he pointed specifically to players like A'ja Wilson and Breanna Stewart as women whose resumes, in his view, carried more weight in that conversation. The comments landed in the middle of an already tense several weeks for the league, one where officiating, player safety, and media framing had all become part of the same ongoing debate. 2 days after Abdul-Jabbar's comments were published, Clark and the Fever hosted Seattle. What followed was not a statement crafted in a press release or a Substack post. It was a box score. Clark reached her 200th career three-pointer in the second quarter, connecting from 26 feet on an assist from Tiasha Harris. The shot broke a record that had stood since the early 2000s, when Katie Smith reached the same mark for Minnesota in 81 games. Clark got there in 74, cutting 7 games off a record that had survived for more than 2 decades. She'd entered the night shooting just 32% from 3 on the season, still working her way out of that 3 of 19 stretch. She broke out of it by going 3 of 5 from deep before halftime alone. The three-point record, as significant as it was, ended up being a subplot in a much larger story. By the time the final buzzer sounded on a 110-107 Indiana win, Clark had finished with 45 points, 10 assists, 4 steals, and 2 blocks. She shot 11 of 18 from the field, 6 of 10 from 3, and 17 of 19 from the free throw line. The 45 points set a new Indiana Fever franchise scoring record. More significantly, no player in WNBA history had ever recorded a game with 40 or more points and 10 or more assists. Clark became the first. That free throw total is worth sitting with for a moment because it speaks directly to a complaint that's followed Clark through much of this season. Fans and analysts have argued for months that she draws far more contact than the whistle reflects, that a guard who plays through as much physicality as she does should be living at the free throw line rather than occasionally visiting it. 19 attempts in a single game is close to what some of her supporters have been calling for as a baseline, not an outlier. It doesn't resolve the broader argument about inconsistent officiating across her games this season, but it does show what her production looks like when she's allowed to play through contact and get to the line at a rate that matches how often she's actually fouled. The gap between that night and her season-long average is part of why the officiating conversation hasn't gone away and why it reached Capitol Hill in the first place. The way Clark affects a basketball game goes beyond any single stat line. Her shooting range starts well beyond the three-point arc, and that changes how a defense has to be built before the ball is even in play. If a defender steps out to contest her at that distance, it opens driving and cutting lanes for her teammates underneath. If the defense sags back to protect the paint, she has the space to rise into a 3 with no real contest. When teams have sent extra defenders at her, her passing has consistently found the resulting openings, whether that's a shooter left alone on the perimeter or a teammate cutting through a lane the defense couldn't afford to leave. Seattle tried a mix of these approaches over the course of Friday's game and struggled with all of them. Dominique Malonga had a strong individual night for the Storm, finishing with 28 points and 14 rebounds, and Awa Pham added 4 made threes, becoming the youngest player in league history to do that in a single quarter. Seattle shot 56.6% from the field for the game. None of it was enough. The Storm actually took a fourth-quarter lead, following a third quarter in which they outscored Indiana 32-23. For a stretch in the middle of the final period, the game looked like it might end as a historic individual performance inside a disappointing team loss. Clark scored 16 of her 45 points in that fourth quarter, and her most important sequence of the night wasn't a shot at all. With under a minute left and the score tied, Seattle's Flau'jae Johnson broke away for what looked like a clean fast break layup. Clark recovered in transition, chased the play down, and blocked the shot out of bounds, killing the possession and denying Seattle a chance to retake the lead. On the ensuing possession, she hit a three-pointer from the left wing to put Indiana up 105-102. When Seattle answered, Clark closed the game by making all 4 of her free throws in the final 17 seconds. Head coach Stephanie White, who had noticed Clark looked unusually energetic before the game even started, spoke afterward about what she'd watched from the sideline, saying simply that it was special and that Clark does things the team hasn't seen from her before. Clark herself described a similar feeling pre-game, saying she had a sense before tip-off that this was going to be one of those nights, and that belief and visualization were part of how she'd prepared for it. What makes the performance carry weight beyond the numbers is the timing. This wasn't a breakout game from a healthy, rested player with no distractions. It came directly after a stretch where Clark was working back from a back injury that had limited her minutes for weeks, in the middle of a shooting slump that had outside observers questioning whether she'd fully recovered her form, and only days after a sitting NBA legend had publicly minimized her standing in the league in the context of a congressional inquiry into whether she's being adequately protected on the court. Any one of those factors is the kind of thing that can get into a competitor's head. Combined, they create exactly the sort of pressure that tends to produce hesitation rather than aggression. Players who start second-guessing open shots instead of taking them. Clark's response was the opposite of hesitation. She attacked the rim aggressively enough to draw 19 free throw attempts, something that hasn't been consistent for her this season, and that ties directly into the ongoing argument about how she's officiated. She hunted her three-point shot instead of pulling back from it despite the recent slump. And in the moment that mattered most, with the game tied late, her defensive effort on the Johnson block did as much to secure the win as anything she did with the ball in her hands. This is now Clark's third WNBA season, and the pattern across it has been fairly consistent. Opposing coaching staffs have had 2 full years to study her tendencies, her preferred driving angles, and any physical or mechanical limitations that might be exploited. That process has come with a level of physical contact that's become its own recurring storyline, from the Alyssa Thomas incident to the broader debate about whether officials are calling her games consistently with how other guards are protected. The congressional letter, whatever one thinks of its appropriateness, was itself a symptom of how unresolved that officiating question remains around her. None of that pressure produced a decline in production. Instead, in her 74th career game, Clark posted a stat line the league had never seen from any player, at any point in its history. The three-point record she broke had stood since Katie Smith set it during the George W. Bush administration. The 40-point 10-assist combination had simply never happened before, from anyone. The broader debate about who deserves to be called the face of the WNBA is likely to continue regardless of what happens on the court. Reasonable people can disagree about how much weight a 2.5-year career should carry against players like A'ja Wilson or Breanna Stewart, who've spent the better part of a decade building the accomplishments Abdul-Jabbar pointed to. But the specific argument that Clark's game had regressed, that a back injury and a difficult shooting stretch had exposed real limitations, is harder to make after Friday night. The record books, at least for one night, did the talking that the debate hadn't settled.